William Holman Bentley was an English missionary who spent 20 years in the Congo region in the late 1800s, doing mission work on behalf of the Baptist Missionary Society. He lived and worked in very close connection with the natives. He was highly sympathetic towards them, but also noticed some shockingly atrocious customs that they engaged in. One of those customs being the buying, selling, and eating of slaves in an organized fashion. Quoting from Bentley's 2-volume work, Pioneering on the Congo, cannibalism on the Upper Congo was bad enough, but it flourished in its worst forms on the Mbanji. There was a much greater demand for human flesh than the local markets could supply. The people did not as a rule eat their own townsfolk and relatives, but they kept and fattened slaves for the butcher, just as we keep cattle and poultry. There used to be a constant traffic in slaves for this purpose between the Lulongo River and the Mbanji. The people on the Lulongo organized raids on the upper reaches of their river, or landed at some beach, to raid the inland towns. They fought the unsuspecting and unprepared people, overpowered them, killed many in the process, and brought the rest home with them. They divided up their human booty, and kept them in their towns, tied up and starving, until they were fortunate enough to catch or buy some more, and so make up a cargo worth taking to the Mbanji. When times were bad, these poor starving wretches might often be seen tied up in their towns, just kept alive with a minimum of food. A party would be made up, and 2 or 3 canoes would be filled with these human cattle. They would paddle down the Lulongo, cross the main river when the wind was not blowing, make up the Mbanji, and sell their freight in some of the towns for ivory. The purchasers would then feed up their starvelings, until they were fat enough for the market, then butcher them, and sell the meat in small joints. What was left over, if there was much on the market, would be dried on a rack over a fire, or spitted, and the end of the spit stuck in the ground by a slow fire, until it could be kept for weeks, and sold at leisure. Sometimes a section of a town would club together to buy a large piece of the body wholesale, to be retailed out again, or a family man would buy a whole leg to divide up between his wives, children, and slaves. Dear little bright-eyed boys and girls grew up accustomed to these scenes from day to day. They ate their own morsels from time to time, in the haphazard way that they have, and carried the rest of their portion in their hand, on a skewer, or in a leaf, lest anyone should steal and eat it. That is how cannibals are made. To awful depths have these children of the Heavenly Father fallen, until they have become indeed children of the devil. Shall we let these innocent heathen go on in their simple way, or shall we trouble them with the gospel? This is how they live up to their light. Again, we say, if the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? This is no worked-up picture. It is the daily life of thousands at the present time in darkest Africa. Hearing that copper was in demand on the Mbanji, they, traders, sent word to their agencies at Manyanga to buy ingots of copper in their district, and to send them up to Stanley Pool. When they went to the Mbanji, the natives would not sell their ivory for any of their wares. All that they asked for was slaves, batu, people to eat. They wanted meat, not brass wire, or copper ingots, or beads, or cloth, or even satins. They laughed at such things. There was ivory in abundance, but it was only in exchange for batu. Several attempts were made, with no success, or scarcely any. The horrid trade with the Bololo of the Lulongo thus became known, and representations were made to the government. A small state steamer was sent to cruise at the mouth of the Mbanji for the suppression of the traffic. A few examples were made. The report spread up the Lulongo that the state was on the lookout to shoot anyone bringing slaves up the Mbanji. Forthwith that part of the trade was stopped. 1 or 2 French officers have been killed and eaten up there since, and there have been punitive dispensations on both banks. Laws have been made against cannibalism, but it will be some time yet before the custom dies out. End quote. Herbert Ward was born in London in 1863. He went on to become an explorer, sculptor, writer, and illustrator. In 1884, he became an officer for the newly formed Congo Free State, where for 5 years he lived and worked in close association with the natives of the Congo region. Quoting Ward, I have personally witnessed convoys of slaves that had been bought or captured being conveyed to tribes who purchased them for food, giving ivory in exchange. End quote. For example, along the Lulungu River, there was a series of strongly fortified villages where slaves were imprisoned like animals, waiting for purchasers to come along and buy them for food. Ward had visited some of these slave meat depots and described them as a condition of savagery and suffering beyond all ordinary powers of description. The pens, or enclosures, where these slaves were kept contained both sexes, men and women, boys and girls, and even infants in their mothers' arms, quote, lying in groups, masses of utterly forlorn humanity, with eyes downcast in a stony stare. End quote. In certain markets, a master could be seen with one or more of his slaves, explicitly advertising and hawking them for sale as food. Slaves purchased for consumption who were suspected of trying to escape were secured in various ways. In one method, says Ward, the unfortunate creature was doomed to lie hobbled with one foot forced through a hole cut in the section of a log, with a spearhead driven into the wood close to the limb, rendering it impossible to move except at the risk of laceration. Other methods were binding both of the slaves' hands above their head to the kingpost of huts, and binding their arms and plaiting their hair into a braid which was tied to a tree branch overhead. In the following quote, Ward reveals the portion of this slave's as-food system that was the most disturbing to him. Probably the most inhuman practice of all is to be met with among the tribes who deliberately hawk the victim piecemeal whilst still alive. Incredible as it may appear, the statement remains justified by abundant proof, as well as from personal observation, that captives were led from place to place in order that individuals might have the opportunity of indicating, by external marks on the body, the portion they desired to acquire. The distinguishing marks are generally made by means of colored clay or strips of grass tied in a peculiar fashion. The astounding stoicism of the victims who thus witnessed the bargaining for their limbs piecemeal was only equaled by the callousness with which they walked forward to meet their fate. End quote.